I beat the DLC a little while ago, and I had to be completely honest, I was surprised by how easy I was able to breeze past almost all the bosses. The only real bosses that gave me trouble were Radon, which took me about 2 hours, and Rolana, which took me about an hour to beat. And with Rolana, I wasn't even dual wielding great axes at the time, so I did kinda do it to myself against her. Every other boss took me about 10 tries or less to complete. And before you guys wonder, I don't summon my first playthrough for any Souls game because I like the challenge. And I didn't really use any broken builds like Bleed either, since I prefer to just play how I want to play, regardless of what the meta is at the time. I don't even think the DLC bosses are as hard as Melania, Malekith, Mogwin, or Godfrey. So it has been kinda crazy to me to see people complain that the DLC is too hard, difficult to be difficult, that the bosses have crazy combos, and they don't give you time to heal, because in my experience, I don't see what you guys are talking about. Now, I'm not trying to put anyone down who did struggle with the DLC, especially if you're new. Everyone struggles with their first Souls game regardless of difficulty, and builds do make a huge contribution to what bosses you have issues with. So with that part out of the way, I want to talk about the hardest boss in the DLC, the promised consort Radon. Because I have heard a lot of complaints about him specifically throughout my videos, and just the internet in general. I have heard he doesn't stop attacking, he gives you no time to heal, his combos are too long, and people feel he is not a well-designed boss overall. I have to say though, in my experience, all of those statements are not true. He actually reminds me a lot of Slave Knight Gale with the way his boss fight is designed. Gale, if you don't know, is a very combo-heavy boss who in Phase 2 starts to go really crazy with his cape and automatic crossbow. And in Phase 3, he also has a certain attack that will lay lightning everywhere, and let's just say it can be just as distracting to watch as Radon's Phase 2 light show. Also, Gale's Phase 3 combo attacks are very spastic, just like some of Radon's Phase 2 attacks are. The reason I wanted to make the comparison is to show that Radon has a predecessor in boss design, which makes him easier to talk about. And as you can see in the clip, I am not using a cheese build, I am not using a shield, and I'm not summoning. Yet, I still beat him. He gives you time to heal when you do it at the right moments. In fact, I used all my tears when I did beat him. His combos do not take forever. I am able to find openings pretty frequently. You just need to recognize when to and not to attack. And design-wise, he is a step up from Gale, because Elden Ring is a step up from its predecessor, Dark Souls 3. When you fight Gale in DS3, unless you use magic obviously, the only real viable attack is RB. And in the game, despite his combos, despite how crazy he gets in Phase 2 and especially Phase 3, people are more than capable of killing him. So with his design successor consort Radon, it's the same, except now we as players have more options than just the button RB for avenues of attack. We can jump attack, use different Ashes of War, dual wield, use the crafting system, use the physic flask, which I personally use to tank his AoE in Phase 2 to get a posture break from. On the subject, if you get enough hits, you can break his posture bar and get a riposte on him. If you really want to, you can always summon for the fight. And lastly, you can use an online guide and /or watch a hitless run for some guidance. I feel most of the players who say the boss sucks, or that the design for him is bad, are just people who keep trying to play Elden Ring like it's Dark Souls 3, or just refuse to adapt and use the tools that the game offer, which is kinda dumb, especially if it's making you miserable playing the game. I will throw a complaint out there though, and say that all the lights that Radon does in Phase 2 are very annoying and distracting. At times, I can't even keep up with what's going on anymore, and that's honestly why I died quite a few times in Phase 2. I don't mind the crazy clone attacks, or that every time he swings his swords, light comes and can hurt you if you get caught by his initial attack, but in my opinion, they gotta be more sparing with the effects because it really did harm visibility. And even though I still enjoyed fighting him, it would have been better if the effects were maybe more transparent. And at least with Slave Knight Gale, when the lightning would come, it would be after a certain attack where a bunch of skulls would hit the ground, so you would have an idea of where they were gonna land. And you could get Slave Knight Gale to walk away from that area. And to talk about another boss, I also heard Commander Gaius has some crazy hitboxes. But to be honest, I really didn't use the dodge button against him since I made use of Bloodhound Step instead. But I'm sure a shield, the new parry tier available for the flask, other Ashes of War, or light rolling would do the trick against him. But again, I just used Bloodhound Step because it was going to be easier than just dodging since there's more iframes. Past Radon, who is a challenge, the rest of the boss fights were pretty easy for me. The best advice I can give is to explore the open world and collect the Shadow Tree fragments and the revered Spirit Ash. But even without finding all those collectibles, I could pretty much beat them spamming jump attack and playing more aggressively. Now, I just want to say as a reminder that I thought the bosses were fine and I enjoyed the boss fights a lot. But I was expecting to see a lot more Phase 3 bosses like we got in the DLCs for Dark Souls 3. But except for the Sunflower, they all seem to have only 2 phases. And they are not the slogfest that DS3 had us face. I was also hoping for another PvP boss because in general, PvP in Elden Ring is lacking compared to its predecessor, which is sad because it's my favorite part of the games. But with how vast the PvE is in Elden Ring, and how many units they sold, I completely understand why PvP had less stuff in it than before in like Dark Souls 3. Now onto some other bosses. I have to say that I love the Sunflower boss. In fact, he's actually probably my favorite. And I know he wasn't the most difficult fight, but I love the area of the boss fight and the boss design as a whole. Not every boss needs to be insane or hard. Sometimes they could just be a work of art. Another boss that I loved was the Finger Mother. That boss felt straight out of Bloodborne, and I really hope the next Souls game is a spiritual sequel to that masterpiece because its aesthetic is peak. Now that I talked about the new bosses in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC a bit, I'd love to hear your opinion about them. Am I crazy for saying that most of them were pretty easy, or did I hit the nail on the head? Also, what is your experience with the bosses and the DLC as a whole? Thank you for watching the video, and...
I'm sorry, sir. It's time for you to leave.